Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Bruscaino is going to join me for this one. I believe we have a photo to show. I rise today with a heavy heart and ask that we adjourn in memory of my father-in-law, Dave Arian, who passed away during the break on January 2nd after a short and tough fight against a very rare and very aggressive form of cancer. Many of you knew Dave from various aspects of his life, most recently as vice president of the Harbor Commission. Dave was a remarkable man, and trying to squeeze his life into a few moments is difficult. The arc of his life was he went from being an upstart organizer and part-time dock worker to president of the international ILWU. He went from an outspoken, self-described, left-wing, radical organizer, anti-war, civil rights, labor organizer, to be vice president of the Harbor Commission here in Los Angeles, without, I dare say, ever sacrificing or compromising or changing his values. He got a well-earned reputation as a guy who got things done, who was very left-wing but reasonable, and who was extremely principled, was truth-talking, and was tough, and was incredibly compassionate. That was the arc of his life. The focus of his life, though, was threefold. It was his family, it was the ILWU, and it was his battle and his commitment to social justice. And just as in Christianity, we say that the Trinity, the God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, are all one. They are not three separate things. For him, his family, the ILWU, and that battle and that activism and that organizing were all one. He didn't juggle the three, and he didn't subjugate one to the other. He elevated them all together. Like a big family event was the Labor Day March in Wilmington. One of his proudest moments, he said, was the Women's March in Los Angeles, the first one after Trump took office, because all of his children and all of his grandchildren were at that event. My wedding to Sean, he thought was a phenomenal family event, but he also thought it was hugely important that there was a huge gay marriage happening in San Pedro. And he cherished and relished in all of that. And he came by it sort of, by blood. His grandfather, whom he never met, was this guy named Israel Arian, who was an immigrant from Lithuania who was killed downtown in Pershing Square at a demonstration, I believe in the 1920s. His father was a guy named Honest Lou Arian. Everybody called him Honest Lou. He was a member of the ILWU and was a friend and confidant of Harry Bridges, who was the radical founder of ILWU. His mother was Rose Arian, and Rose was the political firebrand in the family. She was the one who started the family tradition of getting arrested. She got arrested at anti-nuclear demonstrations. Dave's first memory is of women dressed in black carrying candles. And it was a demonstration that Rose brought him to in downtown Los Angeles the night before the Rosenbergs were executed. In high school, his sister Lorraine, who's a few years older, took him to Torrance to organize a demonstration outside of a housing development that said no blacks allowed. He was one of the first people in Los Angeles arrested over civil rights. He was part of a demonstration at the Federal Building in 1965 or 64 in solidarity with what was going on in Selma with Dr. King. He and his sister were arrested and spent, I think, about 10 days in jail. He was a civil rights activist. He was an anti-war activist early, not like 69. He was there in like 64 and 65. He opened in San Pedro the CAC, the Community Action Center, which was a drop-in center where hundreds of young people from San Pedro and the surrounding areas came and learned about how to engage in the civil rights struggle and the anti-war struggle and the Delano grape boycott. It was so controversial that it got attacked and stoned a few times by members members of a car club in San Pedro, and it was eventually firebombed, and it was burned down. The integration of Dave's politics and his family were so tight that it was politics that got him both of the lasting relationships of his life. It was at the CAC that he met Sean's mom, Roxy, who was the mother of my husband Sean and his sister Justine. And they fell in love there, and they worked together as organizers for a number of years. He worked as an organizer for the Communist Labor Party, for the Black Revolutionary Workers, and they traveled up and down the state, and they took part in strikes. Roxy and Dave were together for about 8 years, so they haven't been together for 40 years. When Dave was diagnosed, Roxy came back from Europe and was at Dave's bedside every single day. In that family, unlike most families I know, if you get divorced, you have uncomfortable moments at a wedding, and that's the only time you've seen each other. In Dave's family, everybody vacations together. His other best friend was Diane Middleton, who he met in Michigan working for a communist candidate for office. Diane came out here, and they were together for a few years, but they became lifelong political partners, doing all sorts of stuff and causing all sorts of problems, often for Joe, down in the port. His labor history, his love was ILWU, and he often said that if it weren't for ILWU, he would either be in jail or be dead. Because ILWU, as one of the most progressive unions around, whose motto is an injury to one is an injury to all, was a place that gave him a safe place to hold the radical views that he held and still make a living. He started out lugging bananas on the docks in 1965. He became a full-fledged member of ILWU in '69. He was elected president of Local 13 in 1984, served 2 terms, and then he ran a long-shot insurrection campaign for the international presidency in '91. And he did something people hadn't done before. He and the family, they went to the sugarcane fields in Hawaii, where those were the members of the LWU, and they did a grassroots campaign. And in a very close upset election, he won. And even in the lefty ILWU, it freaked people out because they thought he was too far left. It freaked people out. He was not reelected to that position, but he was then later reelected back in 2004 as head of Local 13. As his engagement with ILWU, he was a visionary who fought more for pension benefits than for salary increases because he saw what was happening and he knew that was going to be what was important. He fought for workplace safety standards, which had to change when they moved from break bulk to the big cargo containers. He made sure the hiring hall was integral to the union, and that's how everybody entered into any of the locals. And he was key in making sure that women got to become members of the ILWU. He was committed to being an organizer, and during his time with the union, the ILWU workforce at LA and Long Beach doubled. He used his perch as a labor leader to advance other progressive causes. He made sure ILWU was refusing to handle any cargo coming from apartheid-era South Africa. He objected to and stopped the shipment of nuclear fuel rods coming through the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. He marched and organized with the grocery workers, and he took people, labor members here, and organized to go to Nevada for Barack Obama. He was dedicated to labor history, and so when he retired in 2009, he became head of the Harvey Bridges Institute, which is dedicated to telling labor history and the lives of people in Wilmington and San Pedro, and was working with a guy named Jack Barrick on a documentary that will come out soon called Unions Make Good Families. He also wrote a book about the right to get in the fight, his history in the labor movement. After he retired, Mayor Vera Ragosa appointed him to the Harbor Commission, and it shocked a few people that this firebrand was being appointed to the commission. It raised some consternation. And he surprised people because he felt that the port had a social compact, that the port needed to do well so that the workers could do well, so that the port could benefit and serve the community. And he fought to make that port more competitive in a changing era. He fought for the Wilmington waterfront park and for Joe's waterfront development. And a whole bunch of other projects down there. He took that seriously, and even Gene Soroka, who was on the other side of the bargaining table with him in his union days, said Dave was his best ally because he got the big picture. He was pragmatic, and he knew how to get things done and bring people together. But his biggest thing really was his family. He loved his family. Whether it was his sister Lorraine, his ex-wife Roxy, his ex-partner Diane. He was so proud of Sean and Justine and the way they have lived their lives and built their families. When Justine married a guy who had 2 kids, those 2 kids, Annika and Kira, became as much his grandchildren as Jacob or Destin or Jaden Rose. They were all his grandkids. He would come up every single Saturday from San Pedro, would drive up to Mar Vista and pick Jacob up, take him down to San Pedro for swimming lessons, take him to the park, hang out with them for the day. They had epic pillow fights. But Dave, family wasn't about blood for him. Just as he had these great connections with his exes, anyone could become a part of his family. If you were in the ILWU, you were his family. I was shocked at the first holiday event I went to because there were like 70 people there. None of them looked like each other. None of them were actually related by blood, but they were all family. There's this guy, AJ, who was friends of his niece, and he met AJ, and AJ was having a rough time, and he was struggling with drugs, and he was unemployed. Dave had faith in him. Dave said, you know what? Why don't you go to our house in Hawaii and you be the groundskeeper there at that farm? And his faith in AJ turned AJ's life around. And that kind of story I heard so often as Dave was dying, that he just put so much faith in everybody, and that inspired people to be their best selves. He was, as I said, incredibly outspoken. He raised some eyebrows when he was at an event in Wilmington, and he told them that they're not going to get what they want because they don't vote enough for the mayor or Joe to pay attention, and he called on them to rise up, Wilmington, rise up, Wilmington. He was at a TCT committee meeting one day. We were talking about the Clean Action Plan, and Joe and I were pushing the port to go further than they could, and Mr. Krikorian was there as well, and Dave took offense. And he thought that we were, as he said, selling wolf tickets, over-promising, and telling people we could do things that we couldn't. And Joe asked Gene Soroka a question, and Gene started getting up to answer. And Dave, like a hockey player checking another hockey player, pushed Gene out of the way, came up, and dressed us down. Told us we were selling wolf tickets and said to us, if you have a better plan, show it to me. And then sat back down. That was Dave. When he met Ed Renwick, who's an equity finance guy on the Port Commission, he said to Ed, oh, I guess the mayor thought you needed a capitalist. Well, I'm the socialist. When he came here for Fleet Week, he was representing the port when they had the Fleet Week here, and all the uniformed guys were here. I took a picture from here, and I told him, I'm going to post this on Facebook and show it to all of your lefty friends from the 60s. He made me delete it. Dave was an intellectual. He read 50 books a year. He was self-educated, really. He went to high school but dropped out of college. And he taught himself a political theory, an economic theory, and a theory of power. And he had very firm ideas about capitalism and the power structure in this country. My family heard about it on our last vacation. He actually used believe it or not, dialectical materialism as a way to flirt with a beautiful tour guide in Italy. If you can imagine, I can't imagine how somebody can talk Marxism and actually be flirting, but he actually did. And Dave told me, because Dave's been sort of a role model for me about trying to be progressive and push the edge. He told me that I finally became part of the family when I got arrested last summer over the immigration stuff. You know, in his final days, most members of the family had a moment with him where they got to say goodbye. And he said a few words back. And I missed that. And so I saw him later, and I said what I had to say. And I didn't get a verbal response at that point. And I was kind of disappointed. And then a few hours later that day, as I was taking Jacob and saying goodbye, I grabbed his hand and said, "Goodbye, Dave, I love you." And he put his fist in the air, like this. That was all I needed to hear. That was solidarity. That was continue the fight. That was continue the struggle. So, colleagues, and particularly Mr. Wesson, when I'm a pain in the butt and I'm pushing the envelope and I'm doing something, that's Dave. That is Dave's spirit motivating me. A lot of folks have said that Dave is going to leave a void. Dave is not going to leave a void, and Dave would be pissed if he thought that people felt that he was leaving a void, because he was an organizer. Organizers don't leave voids. They make sure someone is carrying on the work. So the void is being filled today by the UTLA that are out on these streets. The void is being filled by the people who are continuing the work at the port. The void is being filled by the Sunrise Movement here in Los Angeles and the new generation of activists. And they are sort of carrying on what Dave would do. And he would be very proud of that. His last organizing was around his cancer. When he was diagnosed, he called an organizing meeting at Diane Middleton's house, and there were 60, 100 people there. And it wasn't, hey, woe is me. It's like, all right, I have this thing. We need to do a lot of work. And he gave everybody assignments. And they carried on, and they organized. And they did what he would do. Dave spoke truth to power. He spoke truth about power, and he spoke with power. So I love you, Dave.
Well said. Well said, Mr. Bonner, and I think Mr. Buscaino would like to tag on to that a bit.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mike, just know, as I mentioned last Thursday in the Port Commission meeting, that you're all not alone. Significant loss to my district and to this city. And I turn to you and Sean, Justine, and the entire family, and thanked you all for sharing him with us. It's hard to capture in just a few minutes the life of someone who had an incredible impact in Council District 15, but Mike just did that. You did that with such grace. And
you can tell the Papadakis story.
I just know last Thursday at the commission hearing, 3 hours of testimony of people that he impacted in the community, in the labor movement, in the social justice movement, in the environmental justice movement. It was just an incredible tribute to a man who gave so much of his life and time to our city and to our port communities. And the story I shared with him, I'll never forget, when someone questioned him at the Port Commission. He stood up on this whole waterfront development thing, and Dave says, "You're full of shit, man. You want to fight? You got one." And we're all, that's the fighter that we'll never forget in Dave. And that was something that we will treasure. The last time I spoke to Dave was last summer. He came to me in a time where we're talking and debating about the bridge home. And he came up to me and shared how much support he would give and what he can do to help get the community to embrace solving issues of homelessness in our city, particularly in the Wilmington and in the San Pedro communities. Clearly, as you heard from our colleague and his son-in-law Mike, we lost a fighter. We clearly lost a mentor, a labor leader, and a legend. He will not be forgotten, and just know that, sharing that to Mike and the entire family. It'll be our duty to carry on his love and his contributions, and we're going to do that permanently. Last Thursday, the Port Commission will rename Minor Street Dave Arian Way, and that street leads to a bench that he valued out in the outer harbor where he will take a lot of his friends and family to sit on that wooden bench overlooking the Pacific Ocean, overlooking the Angels Gate Lighthouse, where you saw the national, international economy move with the ships that came in and out. And we're looking forward to leaving a permanent mark when we rename Minor Street Dave Arian Way. And lastly, if I can, Mr. President, share with you an incredible 3-minute video that the port put together celebrating his life and contributions to the port, communities, as well as to our city. I'd like to share with you and cue that video now, which we thought was an incredible tribute.
Why don't we,
Thank you.
why don't we, I guess it'd be appropriate, why don't we hold that, Mr. Cedillo,
Yeah.
and then we'll end with the adjourning.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Cedillo.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure others also want to speak. You know, so when I decided to run for the city council, I wanted to get informed about the city. So I always left my television station on the city channel so I could see what was going on. And so one day I'm getting ready and I hear this man give this incredible presentation on the value of the port. And he gives this whole kind of analysis of the global economy and the significance of the port. And it was very thorough, very profound, very insightful. I thought, wow, this person really knows what they're talking about. So, you know, I looked up and I looked, and it was David. And I thought, oh my God. So I called him, and I got him on the phone, and I said, hey man, when did you get so smart? And he said, so I told him, you know, it was me and stuff, and he's like, I said, hey, I'm running for city council, right? And he said, well, think of that, you know, you on the council, me here, and so it was a nice moment because it was, as Mike has laid out his arc, the development of this incredible leader. He is, as I like to quote this Italian leader, Antonio Gramsci, he is what he would call an organic intellectual. He was from the working class, he lived that experience, but he went beyond that and gathered and built his intellect based on his life experiences and then on his incredible depth of understanding of all the reading that he did. So he was really, really special. You know, I was a union organizer one time back, and so when I started organizing at the Harbor General Hospital, I got this call from some of his comrades who said, hey, we'd like to talk to you at Diane Middleton's office. And so I went down, and they invited me to join the Harbor Labor Coalition. And so I was involved in the early efforts of organizing that march. Of course, in '91, Mr. President, you remember we had that strike, Rolling Thunder. And it was the same time Dave, who was just one of the most, easy to say, the most progressive labor leader in the country. No question about that. Openly progressive, as Mike said, very open about his political affiliations, his worldview, and was really one of the most preeminent labor leaders in this country, working for one of the most progressive unions in the history of this nation. And so it was an honor to know him. But one of the things I want to leave you with, and thank you, Mike, was that when I did get elected, we were able to have dinner, and it gave me an opportunity to sit for a couple hours with Dave and Sean and Mike and talk about the evolution of our politics and our life and of the relevance of that. No anticipation that he would be sick. I think the last time I saw him here, we had a nice conversation. Always somebody you can just have a good time, insightful, thoughtful, funny, a great perspective on everything in life. And Joe, not just a loss for the harbor, but for this city, for this state, this nation, and frankly, for a man like him, for the world.
Let's play the video.
Well, you know, when I started on the waterfront in 1964, there was very few containers, and the transition has been amazing, you know, and if you look around the harbor, you'll see smaller ships that carry 2,000, 3,000, and now we've got 20,000 TU container ships, and as a result of that, you know, we're now moving more containers than any other port in the country. And I just think that it's important for us to see not only the question of movement of cargo, but what does it do for the community to make a difference in the lives of each and every person that lives in this community. Well, you know, I think the Port of LA, you know, has a dual responsibility. One, to, you know, maximize our profits, you know, off what we make, particularly off the container operations or terminals. But at the same time, you know, we have a social responsibility to the community. And so much of everything in terms of what the community looks at is not these big projects, but projects like this. The thing that makes all this possible, when you look out at these cranes that are working, and you count the number of cranes working, and you see 50 or 60 cranes working, that's money coming into the port. And that's what makes events like this possible. People are recognizing the port now for the great work that it's done. And now when we look at the commercial side and the development of the San Pedro market, we see the brewery, we see Crafted, we see these things that are changing the character of this area, and we made a contribution that really enhances who we are as a port. Well, it's always good to be back in my home here, Local 13, and tonight we're making the rounds because last year, you guys, the women and men in this hall in 63 and 94, moved 9.4 million containers, the largest number in the history of this port.
And the greatest thing I learned about the ILWU is they give you the right to be in the fight. It's the most democratic union. And, you know, the things that I've learned is, you know, in life, if you can be part of one thing that's special, it really gives you meaning in life. And I've been part of something that's been so special to us, to this community, to this country, and to the world.
The 26th at 11 a.m. at the ILWU Hiring Hall in Wilmington, the new one that just opened that he put his heart and soul into creating, with a reception to follow at the brewery at Crafted.
Thank you. That was really touching and well done.